Welcome, everybody. My name is Michaela Hine. I'm with SFU's Vancity Office of Community Engagement. We're really excited to be hosting this event tonight. But first, we would like to acknowledge the Coast Salish people, the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh, on whose traditional territories we are on tonight. So today's speaker will be Eldon Yellowhorn. Eldon grew up on the Piikani Nation, which is actually the site of the first powwow in Canada. Eldon is the chair of the for the Department of First Nation Studies. He is also has an appointment in the Department of Archaeology. So tonight's presentation will explore the Brocket Indian Days, which is the longest running annual powwow in Canada. So now I will pass it off to Eldon, who will present Finding Mile Zero on the Powwow Trail. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for braving the weather to come out to the event tonight. And usually I'm the one introducing people, so it's a bit of a turnaround for me here. So I'm going to be starting off my talk, Finding Mile Zero. I have a short video that I want to show, and then I'll do the PowerPoint presentation. Then I'll have end off with another video clip. So Finding Mile Zero on the Powwow Trail. You know, a few years ago, I had been working with George Nicholas, and George Nicholas gave a talk here last week on intellectual property in cultural heritage, and I had been a part of that IPINCH project, and so when it got to be my turn to take some research semester, I kind of was wondering what kind of work I would do, and so I went back to Brocket and started working there, and people were kind of getting excited because they were about to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Brocket Indian Days. And I thought, oh, this might be a good one, because powwow, that kind of fits in with the syllogism that connects intellectual property and traditional knowledge, you know. So all creative products of the human mind are intellectual property. The powwow is a creative product of the human mind. Therefore, powwows are intellectual property. But unlike other intellectual properties, powwow is not one that can be hoarded or tried to protect it. In fact, the very success of powwows is by sharing it. So it doesn't have much to do with other forms of intellectual property, but what it does, the best analogy for it is what we know in the online world as copylefting, the open source software, where the author creates the kernel and then just puts it out on the internet, and then people download it and they can manipulate it, add it, or whatever. That's kind of what the powwow is like. You know, the Piikani people, they weren't conscious of it when they were doing it back in 1954, but that's what they did. They created the kernel. And then over the years, powwows have spread across Canada. They are in cities, in towns, and in communities that have no direct cultural connection to any of the powwow traditions. So I'm going to start off with a trailer for a documentary that I'm working on.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, in honor of our fifth and final grand entry, please rise in honor of our Eagle staff. Once again, as we pay tribute to our culture, beautiful way of drumming and dancing, and our fifth grand entry here, as we take place, we take pride one more time of our culture, our way of life. This is one part of it, as we share it with all those and all our visitors, and our visitors share it with as well, their way, their lifestyle, their style of dancing, their style of singing here at Piikani Nation. One more time, we've gathered at the 57th Annual Piikani Nation Celebration, and we thank you all. At this time, we're going to honor that here at the Grand Entry with the Eagle staff, as it's going to be making its way into the Grand Entry. And then we have the rest of the color guard. North Grand dancers, welcome one more time. Having the honor once again, we have from the Piikani Nation, carrying the Eagle Staff Global Yellowhorn.
There's definitely a template, I guess, that people seem to follow, and the grand entry, the prayer, and when you look at it here in Canada, it's kind of maybe it's Piikani's template that how people follow. So it's always in the back of my mind.
Piikani Nation, welcome to all the young people. The youth, one more time.
I have a recording that was done by the late John Yellowhorn, and he sings 3 songs that were from the Sundance that they used to have. Because at the Sundance, they would all get dressed, and then they would, parade around the encampment in their finery. And he has 3 songs, one that they used for raising the flag, and one they called, the Grand Entry song, and then the Chief song.
Beautiful dancing, this type of dance is not seen in a lot of powwows. It's only seen in southern Alberta.
We were the first reserve that started the powwows, the Indian Days, hey? And then I remember going there, and it was just a straight traditional powwow, and there'd be so many campers there, so many teepees. At that time, there was nothing but teepees and some tents and whatnot. And there'd be a lot of people sitting at the street, at the square.
I think there's hope for our people because we've gone through such a major cultural change, and it's an opportunity, gets people back in their roots.
Okay, so that's the trailer, and I'm working on the longer documentary, which kind of chronicles the origin of the powwow and how it came to Canada. Because prior to that time, after World War II, there were powwows happening in the U.S., but it wasn't something that was readily evident in Canada. So. What we saw with the Piikani powwow was that they brought the powwow to Canada, the powwow tradition. And it's an evolving tradition. I mean, when we look at the original powwow, it was very modest, When we first started the Brocket Indian Days, there was just an open field that they started. And this is like 1954. The reserve didn't have electricity yet, so when they started the powwow, they just danced until the sun went down, and then it got too dark for anybody to see anything, and that's when the powwow ended. And then the following year, the organizers of the powwow all chipped in a little money to bring a strand of electrical lights to the powwow. And then they could dance well into the night. And the very first year, it was only one day. There was only one day. They had a sports festival as part of it, like foot races, and then they also had a rodeo. And some of those elements still remain. Of course, they don't do the sports day anymore. And at that time, it was just people dancing. But then, after a while, they started to introduce new things, such as dance competitions. So now dance competitions are a big deal, and pay big prize money. You know, there are people who actually, that's why they call it the Powwow Trail. That every weekend there's 2 or 3 powwows happening somewhere, and they have prize money for dance competitions, and so people just travel, going from one powwow to the next, doing that travel thing. So some things have changed, though, since the first days. Instead of having an open field, and in that open field, let me just go back to that. Yeah, the weather was always a factor, because invariably there'd be a thunderstorm, or, you know, Brocket, southern Alberta is a very windy place, you know, so the dust storms are quite common too. Now they have indoor powwow, and it's no longer dependent on weather. And now there's an indoor dance arbor, so they're weatherproof. And instead of having a field of grass, they have astroturf instead now that they dance on. And actually, the people who really like the astroturf are the drummers, because when people were dancing around, the drummers, we were usually in the center. The dancers would kick up a lot of dust, and so the drummers would end up with sore throats from singing. Well, now they don't have to worry about that. They have astroturf, dust-free almost, eh? Prior to the powwow becoming the main focus of the community, there used to be festivals like the Sundance. It was a big deal. And of course, back in the late 19th century, in an effort to Christianize the native people, the Sundance was outlawed by the Canadian government. But irrespective of that law being passed in Parliament, it was unenforceable. So people just kept on with the Sundance, you know, and there's lots of reports in old archival records from the Indian agent saying, I keep trying to get them to replace the Sundance with sports days and stuff like this, you know. And every year they'd go back to the Sundance. But the Sundance had started to wane on its own on the Piikani Reserve, or the Pagan Reserve as it was then known. It had started to wane, and the last Sundance they held was actually in 1953. So it made a quick turnaround. The Sundance ended, but then the very next year was when they held the first powwow. And also, the Sundance was a little bit more restricted. It was societies, sacred societies, such as the Horn Societies, the Itzkenaks, as they're called, or the Buffalo Women's Society, that hold their own little ceremonies. So it was a religious festival, and people would come there, but they would go there on the last day to participate in what were called the grass dances. And the grass dances was the last day of the Sundance, and that was the day that the public was usually invited to come around. Mind you, once powwow started to move indoors and stuff like this, there was not much in the way of grass anymore. So I guess today we'd be inviting you to come and partake in the astroturf dances, you know. And moving camp was actually the inspiration for the grass dances, because they would say, you know, like when Piikani people moved from one camp to the next, they take their teepee down, and then they moved to the next camp and pitch their teepee. And the very first thing they had to do was go around the interior of the teepee and tamp the grass down. So that's where that grass dance, you know, they're going around like this. So that's still the main dance that people do, and it's called the grass dance, you know. And it had a very functional aspect earlier, and then it just became a recreational dance later. So powwows have become very popular across, well, they've kind of transcended Blackfoot culture, Piikani culture now. And you have people, you know, even in Newfoundland, people have started having powwows there. And just a few years ago, you know, like half a dozen years ago, they held the first powwow in an Indian community in Newfoundland. So what makes them popular? Well, here's what makes them popular is that everybody participates. Men and women participate equally in the Sundance. In the powwows, and all age groups are participating as well. So this is. Well, that gives you a sample of like what you're likely to see if you go to a powwow, and the way that people dance have changed too. There didn't used to be women's fancy dance competitions. They often had buckskin outfits, and now the most popular of these fancy dances are called the jingle dress dance. And you see a lot of those women who are wearing, like the one who's right at the front here, they wear these cones that they sew onto their dresses, and by moving around they shimmer with each other, so they call it jingle dress. That was not a Piikani custom. That actually came from the east, Anishinaabe country. Apparently the first woman it came from a dream. She had a dream that she should make this dress, and then she made it, and everybody else liked it, and they kind of started to copy her, and pretty soon it became a standard fashion for powwow costumes. There's also other things, like, for example, the double bustles. I remember one of the first powwows I used to go to when I was a kid, men would have these bustles with the feathers on the tail, feathers, just on the bottom. And then people from the south, from Montana and Washington, started coming up to participate. And they were the ones who introduced the double bustle, where they had the bustle on the shoulders as well as on the hips, and now that's become very common. There was a point where, like these costumes became so elaborate. Blood cartoonist by the name of Louis Soup had this cartoon where he drew this guy who's powwow dancing, and one guy saying to the other, "Is there actually a man inside of all of those feathers?" So, what is a powwow complex? Because the dancing is only one aspect of this. There's lots of other things that are happening. For example, there's usually a crafts fair where women and men, who are making jewelry or beadwork, go and sell their crafts there. There's also one of the more popular events at powwows are the hand game tournaments, and those are gambling games. And at the hand game tournament, you have two teams on opposite side, and they're singing, and they got a couple of bones and that they have to hide, and one of them is marked, one of them isn't, and they have to. They're trying to keep their opponents from guessing, and they have these row of sticks in the front, and they play for those sticks. And then, but at the same time, they're gambling, and the people who are on the teams are gambling, but so are the people behind them, They're gambling on whether that person is going to guess which hand has the marked bone in it. Or else some of them are willing to wait for the whole game, to play itself out. And some of them can actually end up going for a very long time. Of course, rodeos are a big deal with that. And one of the things that they have adopted is the stampede breakfast, When the first organizers started the powwow, they used to give out rations. They used to call it rations, where visitors who came down to participate, they'd butcher a cow or two and then distribute the meat to the people who showed up. Well, they don't do that anymore, but they still want to demonstrate that Piikani hospitality. So now, instead of doing the rations, they have stampede breakfast, they call them, where they make pancakes and bacon and coffee, and people are invited to just show up and help themselves to a Stampede breakfast. They got that from the Calgary Stampede. As I say, dance competitions are a big draw. One of the girls I was talking to this summer, she was dressed in a very elaborate, very colorful costume, and that's something I noticed too. That this was like back in the 70s, and the kind of costumes that the girls are wearing, they were very typical. And then new fabrics started coming and being used, and I asked a young girl, what's the story with your costume? I don't see much beadwork on there anymore, or buckskin for that matter. And she says, have you ever danced fast in a buckskin dress? You know how hot those things get? So all the lighter fabrics are, because it's a very athletic event. I mean, when the girls are out there dancing, they're burning a lot of calories and working up a sweat, so the last thing they need is more buckskin wearing them down. These are, typical, what we would call fancy dance costumes on the left, and the girls' traditional dances on the right. That would be kind of like a scaled-down version of what women would be wearing at powwows. But of course, powwows are not events that are stranded in the past. One of the big deals about these powwows now is they have these princess pageants, and I'll just show you because that's just the only. I guess this is the only place where there is no gender equality, because you don't see a little Mr. Prince pageant there. Although they have princess pageant, and for different age groups, like the senior girls, and of course you can see the three of them there are different age groups. So that's a big deal too, and it's a way of getting them involved, because in order to participate in it, they have to sell tickets. As kind of a fundraiser, so they have to sell tickets, and the one who sells the most tickets gets recognized in this way, as being honored by the powwow committee. But one thing that is missing from powwows is any allusions to the farming traditions. From the time that people settled on the reserve, farming became the mode of life, the way that people lived. They exchanged the old buffalo hunting culture for sedentary farmsteads. But this is not something that really has a great deal of emotional attachment for people. I mean, there's no tractor pulling contests, there's no seed cleaning contests. When you go to the fairs in local towns like Pincher Creek or Fort Macleod, those are some of the things that they will celebrate, or some of the activities that they do, like the best pies in the village or stuff like this. You don't see any of that at Brocket. And I think a lot of it stems from the fact that, farming was kind of an imposed lifestyle. It had it didn't have like an organic anchor in the community. So it was something, even in the past when people were already farming and they did have celebrations, it was always going back to the Sundance, looking back to the earlier culture to find a reason to celebrate. And of course, today, people don't live in teepees anymore. They live in houses, they have jobs, they drive around, they go to town to shop. But when you get to the powwow, it gives them an opportunity to kind of play Indian again, if I can use that, where they're looking at the traditions, sleeping in a teepee, is a big deal for my nephew. This is one of the great things from his summer is to be able to sleep in a teepee for a few nights. So it's just.
The real authentic powwow experience.
Yeah, that dance arbor that they have, it's modeled, or the design is modeled on a Sundance lodge. Rather than the teepees, But the teepees are actually a lot of fun. When I was doing the filming there one evening when people were getting started, and one of my old friends that I knew from childhood, he was putting up his teepee, and so I was filming it, and they required some extra hands, so I just left my camera running, and I ran into the picture and started helping him up, helping put up the teepee. It was a lot of fun, putting up the teepee poles and getting everything ready. If you know what you're doing, you can put a teepee up in 15 minutes, If you don't, it takes a little longer. But one of the things that is, right from the very start, people have always been very attached to the rodeos. Even before there were powwows, they used to have rodeos on the reserve there. And to this day, they are still an integral part of having a powwow. You have to dancing on one side, and then over on the other side, you have the horses. So just. These guys were just warming down their horses because they just finished what they call the Indian pony relays. And these relays, everybody's riding bareback, and they're running at really, like, you can't be afraid of a fast-moving horse and not having a saddle, and they run the quarter-mile loop on the racetrack, and they change horses and do it again. So it's a big deal. And this kind of harkens back, we remember that there was a time when our ancestors used to travel on foot, and their only beast of burden were dogs. And dogs can carry only a limited amount of weight, whereas horses really revolutionized Blackfoot culture because they were just more versatile, and even the name we give to horses, we still we make the distinguish between the horse days from the dog days. The dog days are that really ancient days that go way back to the mythic time, whereas the horse days are a little more compressed in the recent time. But even the Blackfoot name for a horse is Punokomita, which combines two words, Punoka, which means elk, and Imeta, which means dog. So horse is an elk dog. And why would they say that, an elk dog? Well, it says like David Thompson recorded the story of Sakumapi, who was his host. And he said, the very first time we saw horses they looked like elk, but they served humans the way dogs do. So they called them elk dogs. Now, of course, there is a lot of protocol involved with that. In the little video clip you heard Shirley Crowshoe talking about the flag song. It was one of the songs that they took from the Sundance, and which is starts off the Indian Days powwow. So I'm going to play this little clip, give you an idea of what the flag song sounds like. But also keeping your eyes on these. There's all these little kids, in the periphery, and you'll understand why the powwow is going to endure for a long time to come. You can see that little boy, he can barely walk, but he's already dancing with the powwow, doing the powwow dances. And I have to say, I have a personal connection to the powwow because this is my dad, Tom Yellowhorn. This was a portrait of him taken in around 1960, and he was on the very first organizing committee for the first powwow. He was a member of the first Brocket Indian Days, and that was kind of an interesting thing. I mean, like, why would they call them Indian Days, eh? It's exactly that. For a few days, you get to doff your clothes as a farmer and go out there and put on your buckskin and feathers again and be an Indian, So it was a nice change from the usual. And also, this is my Uncle John Yellowhorn, and also my Uncle Jack Crowshoe, my uncle by marriage. They were also on the very first organizing committee. They were also the last two surviving members of that original committee. And this was like 1980, so a few years after, this is like Jack Crowshoe, and that's his wife Missy. That was my aunt. She was my dad and my Uncle John's younger sister. This was the last time I saw them at the powwow in 1984. Shortly after this, Jack went blind, and he just couldn't go out and participate anymore. Although Missy was still very active after this picture was taken. But she did all the beadwork and did all the sewing, the costumes that they're wearing. That's all her own manufacture, and she did it all by hand. And I say, the powwow has evolved and changed. When it first started, it was dancing and singing was a pastime that men participated in. It wasn't something that women really did. Like when women did go to the powwow, they would dance, but they usually were in the perimeter of the dance circle, and they danced in the spot, just kind of going up and down like that with the beat of the drum. And it was the men who would be out in the dance circle. But by the 1960s, things were starting to change, and women, I even remember the very first woman who broke from that dance perimeter and made out, her name was Ruth Bad Eagle, and she was a bad eagle, She was even, and there are many different ways that she was quite a feminist in her own right. So originally the women would dance in one spot in the circle, and it was the round dance, which today everybody participates in the round dance. It's kind of considered a friendship dance. You just get up, everybody gets up and participates. But that originally used to be known as the women's dance. And in order to, there were, because there was this dichotomy, the women were on the edge and the men were in the center. There were couple dances where, and the most popular one was called the owl dance. And this was a woman's choice. A woman got to go and choose her dance partner that she was going to dance with, which could cause a little bit of friction, And if you look, the skinny little guy in the red shirt, that's me, way back in 1974. So powwows are inherently a modern cultural export from the plains. Although they are inspired by a Blackfoot tradition, they really have grown both in terms of culture, traditions, in the way that they're practiced. However, back in the day, singing and dancing were pastimes for men that were anchored in ritual. Today, powwows are very modern because they are secular events. There is no religious connotation. Some people try to introduce ritual in there, but that was never the intent of it. It was to just celebrate dancing and singing. Although there are, events, people will have name-giving ceremonies where they'll make a reservation, of all things, with the powwow committee and say, okay, we'll schedule your name-giving ceremony at 1 o'clock on Saturday or Sunday, and the person brings the entourage along, and they do the name-giving, and then everybody gets up and dances with that person. That's how, in Blackfoot tradition, when you get your name, the person who gives you your name announces it to everybody and then pushes you out and you start dancing. And everybody who is a relative or a friend goes and dances with you, and that's their public acknowledgement that they recognize your name. So as I said, they are secular events in which men and women participate equally and all ages. So you can, in the same dance, you'll see little kids with elders and men and women all dancing around the circle. And originally people just attended to sing and dance, but these are now sites of evolving traditions as well. So for example, powwows have become markers of identity for Aboriginal people across Canada. And yeah, you can go pretty much into every province of this country and you'll see people holding powwows and using their own traditions to do it. I mean, I remember the very first time I saw people with button blankets and cedar hats dancing at a powwow on our reserve, because we had friends who were coming from Oregon and Washington State, and they came down to participate in the powwow, but they brought their own costumes with them. And now the powwow has come to the West Coast, and even here at the Friendship Center, there's a powwow. One night they have a powwow night, and there's a Mother's Day powwow here in Vancouver. Or it used to be at the Trout Lake Community Center. They used to have a Mother's Day powwow. And over in on the Capilano Reserve. They have a youth powwow at the end of summer. So powwows have pretty much transcended Blackfoot culture, and they become popular among people that traditionally didn't have this kind of celebration. Even when I was living in Montreal, I went down to the community at Oka, Ganasatake, and they were having a powwow, of all things, to commemorate the standoff from 1990. It was billed as a peace powwow, There were also outdoor festivals, only in the summertime, but now, you see people having every excuse to hold a powwow, whether it's Christmas or New Year's or Easter, Thanksgiving. The only time I haven't seen people having powwows is Halloween, They're too busy out trick-or-treating. And they've also kind of become part of what we would call First Nations popular culture, in that popular culture, absorbs everything and then reproduces it in its own way. And just about a year ago, I was watching APTN, and they have a comedy show called The Bionic Bannock Boys, and they were doing a parody of powwow. They were doing a parody of that show, So You Think You Can Dance? Only there was, So You Think You Can Round Dance, eh? And round dance is like the easiest dance you could imagine. So if you couldn't do that, you probably can't walk. Some other things that have grown as a result of powwow culture is the music industry. Traditional Blackfoot songs, we say, back in the day, back in the mythic time, there was a period where people were faring very poorly, and they weren't doing very well on earth. And there was a wolf pack that came down from the sky world, and these were wolves that were our teachers and instructors. They taught Piikani people and Blackfoot people certain rules, like the animals you can eat should always have horns or hoofs, and you never eat animals that have paws or claws. So these are kind of the rules that they extended. And one of the gifts that the wolves gave to people was the singing tradition. So when you hear the powwow, the songs at a powwow, that's, they say, mimicking the wolf howls of these wolf packs. And traditionally, powwows don't really have words in them. There's just that chanting, kind of mimicking the wolf howls. But now I've started to hear people introducing words into powwow music, and even English words too. Oh yeah, in Blackfoot tradition, we talk the Milky Way. We call it the Wolf Road, because that was the road that the wolves used to come down from the sky world to the earth. And that was their parting gift that the wolf pack gave to people, was this tradition of singing. Well, a powwow trail describes a popular summer pastime of traveling from festival to participate in it. It always happens on weekends, That's one of the things about it, they've adopted the Western calendar, so the weekend is when you go powwowing. But it also inspired a movie and a novel by the name of Powwow Highway. I don't know if any of you have ever seen John Lennon produced it. The Beatle, John Lennon, his movie company. Also, powwow gave rise to the Aboriginal recording industry. This didn't exist back in the 60s, It began in the early 1970s with the invention of portable recording devices and cassette tapes. And before, the only recording devices people had were the big reel-to-reel tape, magnetic tape. But then when they created cassette tape recorders, people could go take these to a powwow. And I remember it so clearly, back around 1970, it started where as soon as the drummer started, there'd be suddenly this mob of people would just descend on them, and they'd all be holding their little recorders out there, just recording it freely. They were giving away their intellectual property without any kind of credit or any kind of restriction. But what it made people realize is that there was a market for this kind of music. And so before, before the tape recorders, cassette tape recorders came along, powwow music only existed in time, didn't exist in space. So you only heard it if you were at the powwow, and then once the song ended, all you could do was take away the memories of that. But then you could suddenly record it, and take it with you and play it over and over again. And so when drum groups discovered that there was a market for powwow music, well, they took advantage of that as a way of making their own recordings. So you started to hear powwow music on radio and on television. And then people started to book time in recording studios and actually instead of just going out to the powwow and singing their music, now they were going to recording studios, making records of their songs, and then selling these at the powwow, and it still goes on today, except now it's no longer cassette tape, it's CDs that people walk around with them, and they just, walk here, and if you like what you're hearing, you just put your money out there, you get your CD, and, I've done that on several occasions. And now with the advent of the internet and YouTube, powwows have moved into these new media. In fact, I will tell you one of my favorite singers is a fellow by the name of Edmund Bull. If you ever have an opportunity to listen to his music on YouTube, he's got this one song called Boogie Van, and he's playing his music, and then he starts chanting some lyrics, but they're in Cree, and I never realized what they were saying. And then he re-recorded that because he did it as solo, and then he re-recorded that same song with a drum group, and this time they're speaking in English. They're singing in English when they sing the words, and it's all about, I'll take you home in my boogie van, and one of the groups that have really popularized powwow music in a way that is unusual is this group called A Tribe Called Red, and they're very influenced by hip hop music. In fact, that name, A Tribe Called Red, is taken from a hip hop group called A Tribe Called Quest. And A Tribe Called Quest was just in the news in the last couple of days because their lead singer just died. And unlike other hip-hop artists, he died of natural causes rather than from gunshot wounds. But A Tribe Called Red, you'll hear their music in nightclubs because that's where, they played here in Vancouver at the Commodore. They played 2 concerts, and they sold out in minutes of going on sale. So it was very popular. And I'm going to end off my presentation with one sample of A Tribe Called Red. So, the Tribe Called Red, you know, have you ever heard powwow music like that? Yeah, my nephew, Lowell Yellowhorn, was doing his master's degree at Trent University, and he had started a drum group on campus there, and a Tribe Called Red came and asked them to sing their powwow song. They sampled it. So when they won a Juno, my nephew was awarded a Juno as well, because his drum group was the one that got the music started there. Yeah, so that's my presentation. We'll just put that away. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Oh.
Thank you, Eldon. That was really fascinating and great images and clips. So I was wondering, given that it's all kind of a developing tradition or practice, I don't even know if tradition is the right word, is there any kind of dialogue between traditionalists and innovation and what you can bring in and what's more authentic? Or is that an issue at all?
You know, that whole question of authenticity never comes up, you know, because as I say, it's an evolving tradition. People are adding to it, and you know, I think the one place where you really see that is in the costumes that people wear. And when we first started powwows, it was all about beads and buckskin and feathers, and now it's all lame and, you know, Velcro and what is that? All these new fabrics that are, and also the type of colors, you know. The colors used to be very, very muted, the colors of beads. Now it's, you know, like the gaudiest colors like fluorescent pink and green, and it's all mixed in there.
Yeah. Are you a fan of Willie Thrasher's? Do you know much about him?
No, I have to admit, no.
Never?
Is he like a powwow singer? Or?
No, he started out doing cover tunes, and now he does something similar to A Tribe Called Red.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's becoming a... Yeah, I mean, like, that's... The singing is becoming very... yeah, I'd almost say that this is the case where anarchy has kind of been a motif in powwows, you know, and it's actually been a dynamic force with that. Yeah, it's just whatever goes, you know.
Do you remember a group called Redbone?
Yeah, I remember Leon Redbone. There was a band called Redbone.
Yeah, Redbone band.
Yeah, I remember them. They were a rock band, and
yeah,
they very early on they had a few hits, but they also tried to use or incorporated powwow music into their song. And I also have to say too, at one point so did Buffy St. Marie, who was a Cree woman and was a folk singer back in the 60s. She's still around, you know. She still has. In fact, I think she just recently released a new CD. But early on in her career, I remember hearing powwow music in some of her songs. Well, they're using turntables with records, you know, as instruments. But they're also using sampling powwow music, and they remix it. You know, if you go onto YouTube and see Tribe Called Red, some of their performances that they have videos for are live performances, and they'll have people doing hoop dances and that to kind of fill out the concert. Drums, that's it. It was all percussion. There were no flutes or stringed instruments. Yeah, it was just drums. Yeah, and also, like the percussion, it's the timing of the beat. You have the strict powwow song, which is like that, but then you have, that's an owl dance or a round dance style. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for your attendance tonight. I'm very pleased that you were all able to come out here and participate in tonight's event. And also, I should say, tonight this is the end of our lecture series for this year, but we'll be having another lecture series a year from now. So keep it on your calendars. Thank you.